We all know that injecting true stories into games is always one of the key aspects that captures our interest and pushes us to continue playing to the end to discover what the plot is all about. But when it comes to horror games in particular, the idea tends to be way more fascinating and enticing for us because our brains always crave to discover how some mysteries are related to real life or how legends are connected to actual events from history. Discovering that a certain location or a character in a horror game is inspired by circumstances in the real world gives you a weird feeling that mixes both fear and curiosity. On one side, you're wondering how this is possible, and on the other, you're afraid because the real world can sometimes be scarier than the fictional one in entertainment. This is why in today's video I decided to bring this subject to light and talk about 5 specific locations and events in horror games that many players didn't realize were real, and also that the true stories behind them might even be more chilling than the games themselves. So without further ado, let's start.
What is she doing?
Who is it?
Siren is a popular horror franchise that is definitely familiar to PlayStation 2 and 3 gamers, aside from being a well-known horror movie too. The events are set in the remote Japanese village of Henduda, which is cut off from the rest of the world by a mysterious Red Sea that seems to be a sea of blood. The game begins with a cataclysmic event in the 1970s when a cult attempts to summon a deity called Datetsushi using a forbidden ritual. This ritual results in the village being trapped in an alternate dimension and isolated by the mysterious Red Sea, of which no one knows how it appeared or how it can disappear. However, the leader of the cult, Hisako Yao, eventually succeeded in summoning Datetsushi through the ritual. She manipulated the events in the village to create a loop of time and space where she could repeat the ritual over and over again until she succeeded. But somehow, when the deity was unleashed, it became the source of a deadly disease that infected the villagers and turned them into shibito, which are aggressive creatures that are half dead and half alive. They're not typical zombies because they actually have a personality and they can use their intelligence to target others. The game lets you take on the role of multiple survivors who must discover the village's dark history and try to put an end to its misery. This allows you to learn about each character's backstory and motivations because you'll also be able to observe many flashbacks that can give you hints about what actually happened. Despite the creepiness of the story, what many people don't know is that the creator, Keiichiro Toyama, was actually inspired by a real village in Japan to create the fictional town of Henduda. The Japanese village in question is located in the city of Tsuyama, which is a very peaceful small place inhabited by several families who used to be very close to each other. However, in this village, there was a young man at the age of 21 named Mutsutoi who wasn't happy at all with his life and didn't manage to blend in with the people around him. He had severe mental problems, and his state deteriorated even more when it was revealed that he had a dangerous respiratory disease. This disease made it hard for him to connect with friends, but what really devastated him was the fact that women were avoiding him. And this is probably because people at that time used to think that any respiratory disease was contagious, and also because such diseases were fatal in the 1930s. Mutsutoi was in complete rage, seeing women in the village refusing to approach him all the time and not being open to having any relationship with him. However, things took a completely shocking and brutal turn on the night of May 21st, 1938. That night, Mutsutoi picked up a shotgun along with a Japanese sword and an axe, and he decided to start the worst killing spree in recent Japanese history. He started his despicable plan by killing his own grandmother with the axe during her sleep before cutting the electricity line to the village, which left the whole community in darkness. At this point, Mutsutoi felt unstoppable. Knowing that he was armed with multiple weapons, 200 rounds of ammunition, and 2 flashlights strapped to his head. He entered the homes of his neighbors one by one, and ended up killing 29 innocent people and injuring 3 more, which is literally almost half of the population of the small community. This catastrophic event transformed the place into a ghost town, and the survivors even stated that no one visited their town for the decades that followed. This ultimately led to the disappearance of the village, which was merged completely with the big city of Okayama, marking a tragic end to a place that many families used to consider their home. The diary of Mutsutoi revealed so much about his struggle, which started after the death of his parents during his childhood from the same disease that he had. Many pages also indicate that the rejection of women played a big role in his desire for revenge. But apparently no one has even expected that his mind will reach this level of evil and ruthlessness, which makes him a monster with zero remorse. The creator of Siren has made it clear multiple times that this tragic event in Japan's past played a big role in influencing him to come up with the idea of the village of Henuda. But despite the creepiness of the fictional story, the real one remains more effective at disturbing us.
Volterra, 12th March 1938. Rene T., 16 years old, admitted for observation yesterday morning from Pontedera, accompanied by a police officer authorized by the examining magistrate of the Court of Pisa to be admitted for psychiatric evaluation. Medical certificate. Mental illness preceded by warning signs. Has suffered from depression for a year, believing she had tuberculosis. Food deprivation.
The Town of Light is an interesting game that has already been featured in multiple videos on the channel, and every time I talk about it, I find myself curious even more about the location that it centers around and what secrets it hides. The events are set in the Volterra Asylum and begin with a girl named Renee returning to the building in the present day after spending years as a patient inside it in the past, specifically in the 1930s. However, as she explores the asylum, she begins to have flashbacks of her time there. And these flashbacks are far from being cheerful or even indicative of a time that was meant for health improvement and actual treatment. All her recollections revolve around her experiences with electroshock therapy, lobotomies, and various experimental procedures, in addition to enduring mistreatment from both the staff and fellow patients in various forms. In spite of the sorrowful and distressing nature of this narrative, it might have been less unsettling had it been a fictional storyline crafted and conceived by the game's creators' imaginations. However, what's truly astonishing is that everything Renee went through was drawn from real events that occurred in an actual asylum, and memories that continue to send shivers down people's spines even today. This infamous place is called the Ospedale Psichiatrico di Volterra in Italian, also known as the Volterra Asylum, and it was a psychiatric hospital in the town of Volterra in Tuscany, Italy. It was founded in 1888 and was originally designed to accommodate 500 patients, but it eventually housed over 6,000 people. The conditions in the asylum were squalid and overcrowded most of the time, and patients were often restrained in straitjackets or locked in isolation cells. They were also subjected to a variety of treatments that were absolutely useless for their well-being, and in most cases, they were even harmful and extremely cruel. One of the most notorious treatments used at the asylum was hydrotherapy. This involved immersing patients in cold water, often for hours at a time, and the goal was to mainly make them entirely exhausted and unable to resist. Other treatments include lobotomies, which are a form of neurosurgical treatment for psychiatric or neurological disorders like depression, but involve a painful measure of severing connections in the brain's prefrontal cortex. On top of that, electroshock therapy and insulin shock therapy were used all the time as a means of deterring the patients from any possible form of protesting. These treatments often left patients with permanent physical and psychological damage, and some of them didn't even survive. Aside from the medical mistreatment, people at the Volterra Asylum endured neglect and isolation as well. They frequently faced deprivation of fundamental needs like food and clothing, which led to numerous patients succumbing to hunger and disease. So technically, this so-called hospital was basically a strict prison with harsh conditions. But the only difference is that the individuals in it were innocent, misunderstood people, and not criminals. What's even more sad is that the majority of the 6,000 patients never regained their freedom or saw the outside world after going inside, which means that the hospital became a place haunted by thousands of innocent souls full of pain and anguish. But the only good news is that the Volterra Asylum was finally closed in 1978 after intense backlash over the conditions there, and it has since been abandoned and left to completely decay. Now it's just a popular tourist destination for those interested in the dark history of mental health care. But it's also a symbol of tragedy for the families who had loved ones in that shameful building. There are also indications from the developers that Renee's experience in the game may have drawn inspiration from the diaries of an actual Italian girl, who was once a patient in the disgraceful hospital during the 1930s.
I was always scared. They told me that they would bring me to a place where the fear would fade away. That is where I stopped living. I've tried to explain what was happening to me. I was tied to my bed for days and days.
I don't think any horror gamer that was engaged in gaming in the last 10 years didn't play this game, or at least heard about it, or even watched some YouTubers play it. The backstory of the game revolves around a man called William Afton and his friend Henry Emily, who decide to open a family restaurant that's very suitable for kids. They established a pizzeria called Freddy Fazbear, and they decided to provide a cast of animatronic robots that are designed to entertain children. However, the surprising plot twist is that William is not genuinely a nice guy who wants to entertain children, as he might seem. He's actually a psychotic serial killer with a thirst for blood. His twisted mind eventually urged him to wear an outfit identical to the animatronic robots in the restaurant to help him attract children. After succeeding in luring several kids, he killed them and put their bodies inside the structures of the animatronics. Consequently, the robots became haunted by the spirits of the children who were murdered at the pizzeria. But things didn't stop there, because those haunted robots started attacking any adult who came to the restaurant, because the children's spirits were seeking revenge and thought that these adults were William, the one who killed them. Your mission here is to take on the role of a security guard who is tasked with surviving the night by monitoring the security cameras and closing the doors to the office when the animatronics approach. If an animatronic is able to enter the office, you will be killed immediately. But the real plot twist is that this chilling location wasn't completely invented by the developer's imagination. It actually has a clear resemblance to an actual restaurant in real life that was extremely popular in the 1980s and 1990s. The restaurant I'm talking about is Chuck E. Cheese, which is pretty much the most well-known family restaurant chain in American history, and its creative approach to kids is the key that led to its success decades ago. It was founded in 1977 by Nolan Bushnell, the co-founder of the gaming company Atari, and the concept of Chuck E. Cheese was meant to combine a restaurant with an arcade and entertainment center, primarily focusing on attracting families and children. But the game changer for the place's popularity was definitely the animatronic characters who performed live shows on stage and used to play with kids. This made the restaurant the perfect destination for families who wanted to have a meal and give their kids some fun at the same time. The chain's popularity ultimately surpassed the borders of the United States and reached other regions like South America, the Middle East, and Europe. Whether you're in Mexico, Saudi Arabia, or Germany, you can always find a Chuck E. Cheese branch for you and your family to enjoy your meal at. However, this beautiful reputation this restaurant built through the years faced a shocking and unexpected bump in 1993 at the hands of Nathan Dunlap. Nathan Dunlap was a 19-year-old employee at Chuck E. Cheese in Colorado, until he got fired, mainly for his unprofessionalism that made him work with negligence and no respect for the time. But what the manager of the restaurant didn't expect at that time was that Nathan would not take this firing lightly. On December 14, 1993, Nathan went to the restaurant at 9 p.m. as a customer, ordered a ham and cheese sandwich, and even played an arcade game. Afterwards, he went to the bathroom at 9:50 p.m. and hid there until the closing time of the restaurant, which was 10:05. After that, Nathan came out of the restroom, grabbed his semi-automatic pistol, and started shooting every employee in his way. He shot 5 people, including Ben Grant, Sylvia Crowell, Bobby Stevens, and Colleen O'Connor, who begged for her life and dropped down onto her knees, but Nathan shot her with no mercy regardless. All of them were regular young employees except the 5th victim, 50-year-old Margaret Kohlberg, who was a customer receiving her meal there. Sadly, this tragic event resulted in the deaths of 4 innocent people, and the only survivor was Bobby Stevens, who still remembers the horrifying moment to this day. Nathan has planned this attack since the day he was fired because he felt he was a victim of injustice from the managers, especially since he was in a hard financial situation at the time, which also explains why he made sure to steal all the money from the restaurant before leaving. However, the distressing part is that all the people that he killed didn't even have anything to do with him being fired, and 3 of them were just hardworking employees trying to make a living and do their job. Nathan was eventually apprehended shortly after the incident, and in 1996, he was given the death penalty, but execution was scheduled multiple times and was repeatedly delayed. The case became very controversial and led to countless debates until Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper in 2013 decided against executing Nathan, which caused anger from the victims' families, especially because Nathan didn't show any genuine regret during the trials. Even though Chuck E. Cheese continued to operate after this incident, it remained a frightening memory for many of its customers in such a way that some people always linked the restaurant to the attack. Some children even started to feel uncomfortable with the animatronics, claiming that they interact with them in a scary manner, as if they're haunted. Anyway, despite the fact that these claims seem exaggerated and the attack didn't actually have that kind of impact, the chain's struggle kept intensifying until they filed for bankruptcy in 2020, before getting things worked out later. And whether you agree that the real story is related to the one in the game or not, you can't deny that the resemblance is just too clear to be ignored. And this is what makes the game way more terrifying than it originally is. I featured this game before in a dedicated video where I talked thoroughly about its dark real story. But I think it's necessary to mention it again in this video because it's very suitable for today's subject and also because many people might not have heard about it. The game revolves around the curiosity of a 9-year-old boy named Armin, who notices that the house across the street, which is owned by an elderly toy maker, has been abandoned. Armin is curious about what happened to the toy maker and also about the secrets inside the abode, so he decides to sneak into the house alone at night. As Armin explores the place, he discovers that it is full of strange and disturbing objects. The main objects that are scattered all over the place are dolls and different types of toys, which makes sense considering that the owner was a toy maker. However, Armin soon realizes that the house is hiding a dark and terrible secret that goes beyond making dolls in the usual way. He discovered that those dolls were actually alive because they were basically made from actual kids and not plastic. I'm pretty sure that this story seems too creepy to be real, but sadly, the true story might actually be even more horrifying to you. In order for us to discover it, we had to fast travel to Russia almost 12 years ago, specifically to the city of Nizhny Novgorod in the central part of the country. In this city, a person by the name of Anatoly Moskvin was born and raised and lived most of his life. Anatoly was a very educated man who spoke more than 10 languages, aside from being a philologist and historian. He was often seen as polite and hardworking, and that's what got him multiple positions at several universities and even newspapers that revolve around necrology and research about death. Despite the fact that he made so many contributions when it came to educating people and providing knowledge for others, Anatoly ended up taking the science that he was studying to a level that could be similar to performing bizarre rituals driven by insane intentions. To make it clear for you, aside from his multiple professions and habits, Anatoly was actually a body snatcher, which means that he was literally stealing bodies from cemeteries. The panic in his city started in 2009 when locals began to notice multiple graves getting vandalized at night, and most of them were even completely destroyed and emptied. Initially, law enforcement believed that these crimes might have been committed by organized crime groups or gangs, but this assumption failed to lead to any logical results. But the interesting part is that the people in the area started to notice a pattern in the bodies that were being stolen. They discovered that all the bodies that were snatched belonged to young girls between the ages of 3 all the way to 15 and 16. The phenomenon of graveyard vandalism continued in the city for years until it reached an unprecedented high level in 2011. And at this point, Anatoly couldn't keep himself undetected anymore. On November 2nd, 2011, Anatoly was finally caught while he was trying to snatch a body from the local cemetery in Nizhny Novgorod. But what the police found inside his apartment was something that shocked not only the society in Russia, but also people all around the world. At that time, Anatoly was 45 years old, but he was still living in his parents' apartment. When the police officers entered, they found a significant collection of life-size dolls scattered all over the place. They bore a striking resemblance to antique dolls, adorned in an array of fine and diverse clothing. Some were even outfitted with long boots, while others had makeup applied to their faces that Moskvin had concealed with fabric. This discovery would have been less shocking if these dolls were actually normal and made with just plastic and regular materials. But what sent chills down the spines of the officers was the fact that these dolls are literally the mummified bodies of more than 20 innocent young girls. After stealing the bodies from local cemeteries, Moskvin mummified them himself before posing them around his home. His parents were aware of the existence of the mummies, but mistook them for large dolls and never thought they might actually be made from actual bodies. Anatoly stated that his motivation for these actions stemmed from an overwhelming sense of loneliness and his inability to have children. He also said that he was sad about the girls' demise, and that's why he was trying to bring them back to life and engage with them in activities like watching cartoons and even singing for them. He also mentioned that his fascination with the dead started decades ago, during his childhood. He said that when he was 13 years old, a group of mysterious men wearing black suits took him from school and led him to the funeral of an 11-year-old girl named Natasha Petrova. The mother of the deceased girl took him to her coffin and compelled him to kiss her daughter. Anatoly said that he kissed the girl again and again, until the mother put a wedding ring on his finger and a wedding ring on her dead daughter's finger. If this incident actually happened, then it's clear that it had a very negative impact on Anatoly's mental state and his perspective towards the dead. He was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia and sent to a psychiatric hospital to go through compulsory treatment. But despite his confession, he never made an apology to the parents of the little children, because he was convinced that he never had bad intent and was just trying to make their kids happy. Although the parents had a range of emotions toward him, many found his actions unforgivable because he inflicted additional anguish on them, compounding the sorrow already caused by the loss of their innocent kids. This is exactly what Natalia said she felt when she found her mummified 10-year-old daughter in his apartment after her tragic murder in 2002 at the hands of a drug addict. So regardless of Anatoly's reasons behind his actions, I personally can't put myself in the parents' place and undermine what he did, because none of us went through the pain that they felt. But I would definitely be interested in reading your opinions in the comments below on whether you see Anatoly as a ruthless criminal who deserves punishment or a mentally unstable individual who needs help.
Что я очень страдал от одиночества, особенно в летний период времени, когда родителей не было и когда они забирали кота. Значит, соответственно, я работал за компьютером, у меня такая работа журналистская, что я много чего писал, в основном за компьютером. Я им включал, я их рассаживал, у них были просверлены дырочки под глазки, соответственно, я им включал мультики, я им включал детские песенки, я им сам пел песни, которые мог, потом, обычные детские песни, то есть то, что бы я стал петь когда у меня будет живая
I'm sorry, my son. I didn't want to have to do this to you. But you can't leave. Not yet. There is so much yet for you to witness.
Outlast is a psychological horror game considered one of the most popular releases of all time and also one of the most disturbing ones. This reputation wasn't given to the game for nothing. It was actually gained through a very dark story, a chilling environment, and creepy encounters that both you and the protagonist will have a hard time dealing with. Just like the Town of Light, the main location here is an asylum known for its many secrets and unpleasant history. It's called Mount Massive Asylum and is located deep in the mountains of Lake County, Colorado. The events start when the protagonist Miles receives a message from an anonymous whistleblower working at the asylum who claims that the company that owns the asylum, known as Murkoff Corporation, is conducting illegal experiments on the patients, and consequently, Miles decides to investigate the message so he can confirm if it's accurate or based on exaggerated speculations. The most infamous experiment of the Murkoff Corporation is called the morphogenic engine, and it's basically a machine that is used to induce lucid dreaming in patients and to allow them to control a sentient nanoswarm called the Walrider. The Walrider is a parasitic entity that can possess the minds of humans, making them capable of great violence. The corporation's purpose for this was to create a super soldier with no emotions, but obviously things didn't go as planned, and the asylum eventually became overrun by homicidal patients who thirst for blood and keep attacking each other. Initially, this storyline may appear utterly fantastical, something that belongs solely to the realm of movies or video games. However, the revelation becomes even more shocking when you realize that the developers drew inspiration from genuine historical events and a real-life experiment conducted decades ago. During the Cold War era, the CIA in the United States started a program called MK Ultra, which is basically a series of experiments that were completely secret and also far from being ethical or even done in good faith. CIA Director Alan Dulles granted official authorization to MK Ultra in 1953. It was born out of concerns that the Soviet Union was conducting mind control experiments, and the CIA wanted to explore similar techniques for spying and interrogation purposes. But the problem is that in a country that was promoting itself as a leader of the democratic world, it was obvious that such activities by the government would be considered shocking for the public, and that's why they were highly shrouded in secrecy. The test subjects of MK Ultra included prisoners, mental patients, soldiers, and even unwitting American and Canadian civilians, and most experiments were conducted without informed consent. If we focus on mental patients in particular, we'll see the resemblance to Outlast even clearer because this is when the Mount Massive Asylum becomes real. In order to get as many test subjects as possible, the US government considered mental asylums one of the ideal places to do experiments, because the patients there are already expected to get treatments and drugs. But to make things even more undetected, they targeted the mental hospitals with the worst reputations because they usually contain patients for whom no one cares about their condition in any way. One of the asylums that captured the CIA's interest was the Penhurst Hospital in Pennsylvania, which was a state-run institution for mentally and physically disabled individuals. This asylum was basically a horror movie in real life. Over the years, it became severely overcrowded, and the conditions inside the institution deteriorated significantly, which led to countless reports of neglect and abuse. The institution's residents, including children, were subjected to inhumane treatment to the extent that they often lived in squalid and unsanitary conditions. Physical and emotional abuse by staff members was common, and residents were sometimes restrained or placed in isolation. Even before the CIA came, Penhurst was already the site of various enigmatic medical experiments and procedures, including the use of electroconvulsive therapy, known as ECT, which is a treatment that involves sending an electric painful current through your brain. Nevertheless, one of the most notorious aspects of the MK-Ultra program was its use of the hallucinogenic drug LSD, which is a drug that directly affects people's emotions and makes them experience visual and auditory hallucinations. The program sought to determine if LSD could be used for mind control or truth serum purposes, but many individuals were dosed with LSD without their knowledge, leading to severe psychological and emotional trauma. MK-Ultra remained highly classified for many years, but it started to come to light in the 1970s. In 1973, when the Watergate scandal was unfolding, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of most of the documents related to the program. However, some files survived, and the program's existence was revealed through investigations and Freedom of Information Act requests. The U.S. Congress in 1975 launched investigations into MK-Ultra, leading to Senate hearings. These hearings exposed the extent of the program's unethical experiments and led to public outrage. Subsequently, the American government enacted stricter regulations regarding human experimentation and the protection of human subjects in research. But this didn't stop many survivors of the experiments and their families from filing lawsuits against the government, seeking compensation and acknowledgement. Despite the government's attempt to erase this page from its record, this evil program is still cited today as an example of government overreach and a violation of individuals' rights. It remains a dark chapter in the history of intelligence agencies and psychological research in the United States, and some people still believe that such experiments might be ongoing even in the present time. Their claims are valid because I also forgot to mention that MK-Ultra was actually something that many American citizens were suspicious of and gave warnings about, but they were seen as conspiracy theorists or sometimes even as insane people with wild imaginations. It's also worth noting that the Allen Memorial Institute in Canada was another psychiatric hospital that was used by the CIA to conduct mind control experiments on patients. Despite the evidence, neither the United States nor Canada have officially admitted to being responsible for the experiments, which ultimately led multiple survivors to start a legal battle asking for compensation and recognition. To be clear, the real-life story is more disturbing to me than the fictional one of Outlast, because in real life, the perpetrators are basically the same people who are supposed to protect your well-being and ensure your safety, and you're basically trusting them with your own health and life. And what's even more horrifying is that we're not even sure if these activities are actually non-existent today, or if they're happening in a much smarter and quieter manner.
Don't trust them. They'll tell you it's science, but it's not. They were waiting for us in this place. Billy
They're in my blood if they want to get out.
They've always
Healed.
been here.
The main list of today is over, because I tried hard to delve deep into the most interesting stories, particularly to save time. However, there are other games that deserve an honorable mention. One of those games is Cursed Mountain, which is a Wii game that came out in 2009 and tells the story of a mountaineer called Eric, who embarks on a journey to rescue his brother Frank, who's been possessed by unknown entities. The story might seem fictional at first, but it was actually inspired by the tragedy of Reinhold Messner, the first person in the world to make the ascent of Everest without supplemental oxygen. Robert and his brother Gunther attempted to climb the famous Nanda Parbat mountain in Pakistan, but sadly, during their descent, they faced a strong avalanche that resulted in the death of Gunther and caused one of the saddest moments in Robert's life. Another amazing game that people probably don't realize is based on real events, especially not Americans, is Murdered Soul Suspect. The game revolves around a detective who gets killed by an anonymous serial killer in Salem, Massachusetts, who eventually turns out to be a girl named Abigail Williams. This girl is actually a real historical figure and the main accuser in the Salem witch trials, which occurred in 1692 in colonial America. She wrongfully accused hundreds of people of witchcraft, and historians to this day are still confused about her motives back then and why she loved watching people get punished for things they didn't do. Anyway, I think this video is getting longer than expected, and that's why I should end it here. But if you enjoyed this type of content, make sure to give it a thumbs up and also give me some more ideas in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe and don't push yourselves too hard.